you waiting for me?
I think Paolo's ready.
Is he ready? Okay. Hi, everybody. This is so weird. You can't see anyone. So good afternoon and welcome to the UCSD Visual Arts Department for the 2021 Longenecker-Roth Artist in Residence Lecture. Martha Longenecker-Roth was an artist who worked in ceramics and design and was professor of art at San Diego State University and the founder of the Mingei Art Museum in San Diego's Balboa Park. She was committed to art for the many rather than for the few, and to breaking down the barriers between fine arts, craft, and folk art. The Longenecker-Roth Artist in Residency Endowment was established in 2016 to extend Martha Longenecker's legacy as an artist and educator. In the spirit of her historic impact on the visual arts in both local and global communities, this endowment to the Visual Arts Department enables us to annually bring to campus an artist of national and international stature with the aim of inspiring our students to broaden the scope, appeal, and range of their art practice, as well as inciting exchange with faculty, the campus community, and local artists and audiences. This endowment was made possible due to the generosity of our friend Anna Smythe and the support of Christina Della Colletta, the Dean of Arts and Humanities here at UCSD, both of whom we thank very much for this opportunity. I also want to thank the Lair Committee, Monique Van Genderen and Nicole Miller for their contributions as well. Thanks to Amy Adler, Chair of the Visual Arts, for her support, and to our amazing staff, Laura, Julia, Nick, Paolo, and Lucas, for their immense support in making this possible. So today I'm really, really excited to welcome Beatriz Cortez, who is both an artist and a visual and cultural literary critic. Beatriz was born in El Salvador and migrated to the United States in 1989. She obtained a PhD in Latin American literature from Arizona State University and an MFA in art from Cal Arts in 2015. She specializes in contemporary, she's a professor at Northridge, where she specializes in contemporary Central American literatures and cultures from an interdisciplinary perspective, the construction of memory and the imaginaries of the future. She's an artist who considers ancient crafts in relation to modernity, migration, and labor. She links crafts to acts of immigrant labor and its relationship to memory and modes of the transitory. Issues of skill are an aspect of craft, considering our relationship to material in different spaces is present. She speaks of the history of craft as a container for memory, informing our memory to things and ourselves. Things are in danger of being lost. Beatrice's dedication to using craft as a way of mining history is wonderfully aligned with the legacy of Martha Longenecker-Roth's work and the focus of her generous endowment to UCSD. She's the author of Aesthetics of Cynicism, Central American Post-War Fiction, which was published in 2010 in Guatemala. She's the co-editor of the third volume of the series Towards a History of Central American Literature, titled Perversions of Modernity, Literatures, Modernities, and Displacements. And she co-edited a special edition of Revista, oh my God, Libro Americana on Contemporary Central American Cultural Studies. She's done loads of writing. She's very smart and brilliant. She has exhibited her work internationally, including in the last Made in LA at the Hammer, the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York, the Ballroom Marfa in Texas, in Shanghai, in China, all over the place. She has received the 2018 Raymond Hortman Foundation Fellowship for Emerging Artists, and the 2017 Artist Community Engagement Grant and the 2016 California Community Foundation Fellowship for Visual Arts. She is all over brilliant, and we are very excited that in the fall, health permitting, that she will be with us for 5 weeks working on her own work, and that we will have the opportunity to engage with her in a really holistic kind of manner. So just before I pass over to Beatriz, I'd just like to remind you all that we're going to end to join us after the lecture for a Q&A, which will be hosted by MFA student Bailey Davenport. And we welcome you to add any questions you have into the chat. And so now I'm very, very pleased to present the 2021 Longenecker-Roth Artist in Residence, Beatriz Cortez. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anya, for that wonderful presentation. So generous of you. I want to begin by expressing my gratefulness to the Longenecker-Roth Artist in Residence program at UC San Diego. Due to the pandemic, as Anya was saying, let me share some slides as I talk. Due to the pandemic, as Anya was saying, we had to delay my residency until this year. And it is a pleasure and an honor for me to further the legacy of artist and teacher Martha Longenecker, with whom I identify in many ways, especially because of our shared conviction that it is important to stretch our understanding of contemporary art and to pay attention to the conceptual content of labor, as well as the belief that work can carry the voices of many other people. I'm honored to have been chosen for this award by the Faculty in Visual Arts, and I'm looking forward for the time when we can gather again. And getting out of the pandemic will also mean for me spending time with all of you in San Diego, so it will be extra special for me. And I also want to thank to faculty in a special way, Anya, who has coordinated and has had to cancel and reschedule the logistics of my residency several times, and Amy Adler, the chair of the department, who worked with me throughout the nomination process for this award. I'm looking forward to spending time with the faculty and students in the department. And I'm also excited about meeting with some of the students this afternoon. I'm looking forward to meeting the rest of you in the fall. And in the meantime, I'm sorry that I'm only able to visit virtually today. I would have loved to be there in person, spending the day with all of you. I want to begin by telling you a little bit about my work. There are three concepts that are central to my work, I would say: time, simultaneity, and movement. And through my work, I explore how issues such as race, class, gender, migration, identity intercept or cut through those concepts. Time has become a central idea in my work, particularly in my effort to break chronologies, which are Darwinian, because they push ancient peoples, indigenous peoples to the past and imagine a future where they are not, as some idea of progress. On the one hand, my work is about the experiences of simultaneity, of being into different time frames, living into places at once. For me, usually that means living in San Salvador and Los Angeles and existing in two or more but different versions of modernity in different cultural worldviews, moving back and forth within different technologies, languages, experiences of climate on Earth, relationships to objects and plants and animals. More importantly, my work is about movement, and because of it, it is about the future. I build memories so I can imagine possible futures. And so my presentation today, I would like to talk about some of the ideas that inform some of the works that I have been making during this year of pandemic, and some of the works that I'm envisioning for the near future and that I might be making during my time in San Diego. And I would like to tell you a little bit about how I'm striving to collapse time, to break chronologies, to generate a conversation through my work of ancient and contemporary thinkers who are in many ways exploring similar concepts. The conversation out of whack with time and chronologies is what I call an untimely conversation. And I must say that sometimes this conversation is happening between philosophies that were written on paper or on a computer screen, and others that were written in stone, in ceramics, and in other materials. So I want to begin by speaking a little bit about time travel and the concept of the untimely, as I was saying, which is about imagining other realities and other possible presents, other possible pasts. But first, let's talk for a moment about the concept of the untimely, as Nietzsche understood it, maybe, imagining that it was he who was untimely, or maybe as Peter Osborne understands it, questioning who is our contemporary. Peter Osborne imagines all the time that our contemporaries, we can choose, and they don't have to be alive now. They can be anyone who was born at any moment. If we want, we can create our own version of the contemporaries. And so that made me imagine a group of people who spoke my same language, many of them philosophers, artists, many of them living in different time periods and spaces, have never met in person. They and their words allow us to form a community through space and time as they pop up in my mind while I go about doing my daily tasks. They have become some sort of my imaginary friends, my contemporaries. They help me make sense of uncharted territory. This concept of the untimely came to my world, not only through the work of philosophers, but also through the conceptual worldviews of indigenous peoples. I'm very fortunate that I have been collaborating with a Cachiquel collective in the town of Patsicía. This is the entrance to the school 3 de Junio in the town of Patsicía, and to the right from here is the entrance to the first classroom, which has become the Community Museum of Memory, Cajay, Moloch. I have known them for about 14 years now, and we have collaborated on several projects together. One particular project was a book that collected their ideas, their photographs and objects, and included my reflections about our collaboration and their work on memory. This book is titled Cajay / because they're imagining a temporality that has not ended. And any of you who read Spanish and would like to read this book, please let me know. I'm happy to send you a link to the website where it's located. It includes an essay authored by the Cachiquel Research Collective, or the Colectivo Cachiquel de Investigaciones, about ancient objects. And that essay has tremendously impacted my work during this pandemic. Here you see a group of men from the town getting fortunes from the fortune teller, a collaboration of a series, one of the series of works that we made together. And this fortune teller holds inside the desires for the future that this community sent to me, and that I programmed into an Arduino, and that people can press a button and get a ticket that has their desires. And so in the story of creation, preserved in the Popol Vuh, the objects, the sacred book of the Maya Quiché, the objects that were not treated well by the humans of their era rebelled. Hablaron todas sus tinajas, all of their jars spoke. Sus comales, their clay griddles. Sus platos, their plates. Sus ollas, their pots. Su nixtamal, their nixtamal. Las piedras, the stones, de tenemastes que estaban en el fuego se lanzaron con ímpetu a sus cabezas. The cooking stones that were over the fire threw themselves with all their might over their heads. Les hicieron daño. They hurt them. Desesperados, desperate, corrían apresurados. They ran away hurriedly. Querían subir sobre las casas. They wanted to climb over the houses. Pero las casas se desmoronaban y ellos caían, but the houses crumbled and they would fall. Querían subir sobre los árboles. They wanted to climb over the trees. Y los árboles los rechazaban, and the trees rejected them. Querían entrar en las cuevas, y las cuevas se cerraban ante ellos. They wanted to enter the caves, and the caves would close in front of them. Here's an example of one of the fortunes that comes from that box. Rica Kaslen, Richa Mac, Rica Vij, nuestro futuro dice, our future says, there will be justice. Cajay Moloch. In a similar manner, the Cachiquel Research Collective explains that the ancient objects have a peculiar characteristic, and I quote, that makes them reveal themselves or to hide from people. They possess a kush, which can be translated as a soul, a center, an essence, a heart. In other words, it is the vital energy that all beings possess, human or not. One of the arguments presented in this essay is that they wrote, that they authored in the book, is that through the daily coexistence and the quotidian use of ancient objects, people in the community are able to form what I imagine as an untimely community with the ancestors. In other words, that they are able to cross time and through the use of the objects, form a community with others who are no longer there. The authors provide some examples. Don Julian was digging a well and he found a large stone that later was used as an altar by the people in the community and some visitors. Researchers have conducted studies of this object and have called it Altar 1. Don Gavino found 2 carved stones in the shape of animals. He transported them to his house and decorated them, and he placed them in his patio under a lemon tree. He bathed them regularly. Don Toribio found a jade figure, and with it, he made a necklace. He added the image of Catholic religious figures. Don Victoriano thinks that one must not remove the dirt from the ancient objects because it is part of their memory, and with it, they look better. Don Fermin has been lucky to find several stone objects in his land, and he has collected them and placed them in his garden and in other spaces in the home. Through this daily coexistence, the Clockshop Research Collective reached some points that are parallel to what Karen Barad argues is the entanglement of matter, or other scholars have argued about the vibrancy of matter from perspectives linked to philosophy or quantum mechanics. The objects are beings. They have wills. They decide when to show themselves and when to hide. They rebel. They can punish. They can protect. In other words, in order to coexist in community with these objects and with others who made them, who held them, who cherished them, the authors explain that what is needed is respect. By this, they mean that respect of ancient traditions is required in order for the objects to reveal themselves in all of their meanings and to function as portals for the formation of untimely communities with the ancestors. In the absence of such respect, the objects become merely archaeological artifacts, subjected to a realm that is no longer communal, but a university realm, an academic realm, or the realm of the state, they say. Some of the fortunes that were programmed into that fortune teller also became big banners painted by hand by the members of the community. In this case, it's, this banner was hung in the market, and it says, "We will know the truth. Our voice will be heard. We will be respected. Kahai." However, within the community, these objects retain the powers to form communities across time and across space with the ancestors. As the Clockshop Research Collective argues, the objects embedded into daily life in the community also pose questions about the different ways to engage with objects, especially outside the academic realm of archaeology. And I'm going to show you a series of images. In this case, this is the construction of a collaborative piece between Rafa Esparza and I called Copan Sur after Portal Sur after Copan, which is a piece that we built in front of Ballroom Marfa in Marfa, Texas. In the theory of the disappearing future, and this is an image of all the artists who worked with us in the making of this work, and of Matt, the installer. In the theory of the disappearing future, Claire Colebrook addresses the issue of reading as part of the process of becoming. She engages with deconstruction, not from a tradition linked with Derrida, which after all reconstitutes subjectivity and context, and by doing so, reinstitutionalizes the diagram of the identity practices inscribed on the subject within the humanist philosophical tradition. And I must say that when I'm saying reading, I mean reading anything, right? Reading the objects, reading the portals, like the portal that the Maya built at the entrance of the great city of Copan, for example, which is what we're evoking here in this case. In other words, Derrida's deconstruction moved towards the past. On the contrary, Colebrook is interested in understanding deconstruction towards the future from a perspective that is closer to the teachings of the man in his insistence that we approach culture, images, texts, landscape, art, as if detached from all humanity, as if, to use Deleuze and Guattari's terms, it was without a people, as though the population were still missing. In other words, to approach everything as if the humans that were meant to perceive it had not been born yet. That is, to approach everything as if it were part of the future, especially a non-human future that would allow us to imagine a new vision, a vision that's not originated from the perspective of a human, when restoring everything, rather than restoring everything to its original intention, which would equal to assigning it a fixed identity, giving priority to the intention of the artist, as we have become used to doing with post-colonial studies, especially when they first emerged. This would take us to give new life to a text or an image each time we approach it, each time we engage with it, each time we coexist with it in daily life. So that's what some of my attempts to bring to life, to engage in conversation, to continue the construction of ancient objects has to do with the idea that they're also in constant motion. They're also in the process of becoming. I want to show you a series of Jaguar Heads that are part of a collection that an archaeologist in El Salvador, Federico Paredes, who's now based in Mexico City, has collected. And these Jaguar Heads are from the pre-classic period, meaning the earliest time that we have documented. One of the works that I'm currently working on is the creation of a small monument called Cabeza de Jaguar. This project engages with the history of pillage of historic monuments and ancient works of stone, made in stone in what is now the western region of El Salvador in Central America, and recreates in steel the stone carvings known as Monument 47 of the Cabeza de Jaguar tradition. This monument, here you're seeing Monument 14, which was made 12 centuries ago in that same region, was stolen in March 2015 in Santa Ana, El Salvador. This is Monument 18 now. Recreating is a gesture of longing, a way to create memory in the absence of what was taken out of the fragments and records left. Mainly the drawings, and this is the object that was stolen, Monument 47. The drawings and cataloging of the work by Salvadoran archaeologist Federico Paredes is what's left of this monument, and it allows for the celebration of ancient forms of abstraction, one that approaches the natural world, but also gestures towards new species, past or future, and evokes the magical powers of sacred objects and of the forces of the universe. This monument was made when a group of people who might have contributed to the cultures that later became the Maya in the region that is now Western El Salvador were transforming their lives from nomadism to sedentary lives. Building this monument here is a statement that brings the powers of the ancestors, if you have respect, and of the forces of the universe that protected their ancestors at a moment when many people who had to migrate north to survive are struggling to rebuild their lives here, to find stability, to create a new home, to build a sedentary life, and especially during this pandemic, to survive. We are at a time when, as nurse Dawn Wooden pointed out, immigrants from Central America and other countries, particularly at the Irwin County Detention Center in Georgia, where she works, but who knows in how many other facilities, are being targets of forced sterilization, that a government contracted doctor is performing sterilizing procedures on women in ICE custody without their consent, and oftentimes in detention centers for profit. The Cabeza de Jaguar has powers to protect them from racism, from being the objects of biopolitical experimentation and administration, from being the targets of a long history of eugenics and genetic experimentation in California, where between 1909 and 1970, more than 20,000 people were sterilized. During the last few years, I have conducted research at Caltech and other archives where I have gathered information about the history of genetic experimentation in plants through programs such as the Agricultural Explorers, and being there, spending time in Pasadena, in the northeast part of Los Angeles, in Sunland, in San Fernando, in Silmar, in La Crescenta, has allowed me to also enter in conversation with many of the stone builders who lived here in Los Angeles about 100 years ago, especially an indigenous stone builder who specialized in the construction of the pillars in the porches of craftsman homes, Dan Montelongo. And so this piece that you see in front of you, Cairn, was made as a conversation with the work of Dan Montelongo, thinking about how ancient indigenous peoples built pyramids and build other structures by knowing how to place the rocks in such a way that they would be sustained and supported there in place by gravity. Programs also like the experiments led by the United Fruit Company or the undignified treatment of humans, such as gassing immigrant laborers with pesticides during some decades, with tear gas during more contemporary times, or today with the revived practice of forced sterilization in detention centers. I was thinking of these archives of the Human Betterment Foundation at Caltech in Pasadena and the United Fruit Company in Central America when I built the memory insertion capsule, a steel structure that takes on the form of a space capsule, but that also brings together indigenous forms of architecture, Spanish colonial design, craftsman architecture, industrialization, and the precarious living inside a tent, evoking in this way multicultural coexistence as we experience it in the city of Los Angeles and the refugee and housing crisis. It also includes a visor, evoking at once the Mayan glyph for zero and a machine eye, one that allows the viewer to see fragments of this historic relationship between the United States and Central America, as well as the role of the Popenoe brothers in this colonial and imperialistic enterprise. By watching this video, viewers are gifted memories that are taken directly from local archives about migration, racism, scientific experimentation, agricultural exploration, the history of the United Fruit Company, marriage counseling, which was part of eugenics as a way to keep people who were considered fit, married, and reproducing, among others. Foucault helped us understand the different kinds of power that operate over us, pastoral power, guilt, disciplinary power, biopower. A few years before I was forced to migrate from El Salvador, Foucault taught a class where he explained how biopower is implemented. I don't know if we would need such an explanation now when it's so visible. For instance, in the decision-making over who gets access to a vaccine, who gets access to testing, who gets access to treatment. He said, the fact that the other dies does not mean simply that I live in the sense that his death guarantees my safety. And by I and them, he's meaning those who are recognized by the state, right? The death of the other, the death of the bad race, of the inferior race, of the degenerate, of the abnormal, is something that will make life in general healthier and purer for the white supremacists, of course. So thinking about some of these things and thinking about ancient understandings of plants and their relationship to the cosmos, I made this work, Tolkien, which I made as a two-part sculpture. One part that was produced by the Hammerford Made in LA, and another part that was placed at the LA River that was commissioned by Clockshop. And the two sculptures were pointing at each other and separated by about 22 miles. And separated as they were across the city of Los Angeles, they are also revealing many things. On the one hand, they're revealing the very different experience of living in different parts of Los Angeles, the West Side or the East Side. They're revealing also many different understandings of love, of what it means to sustain relationships in the distance, of having glitches and forms of miscommunication, of having to fill the gaps in speculative ways in order to imagine how the loved one is separated from you. And also this work was inspired by the idea of simultaneity. It had gears that moved simultaneously in linear and circular motion, and that are called hypocycloidal gears. And it was inspired by the Mayan calendar for agriculture and the Mayan understanding of time, which is circular. And that calendar, Tzolkin, filled with futurity, because it's the calendar that's used to read people's destiny, to imagine their future. So going back to Foucault, for Foucault, to kill does not only have a literal meaning, it can also mean exposing someone to death, increasing the risk of death for some people, or quite simply, political death, expulsion, rejection, and so on. Forcing people to migrate, giving them no choice but to migrate, is a way to eliminate them from the nation, as it is to literally kill them, to render them invisible. But migrating is nothing like death. It is all about becoming. It can bring with it many years of loss and some mourning, but also special powers of simultaneity and lots of joy. Because helplessly, I am an optimist, and as long as I'm alive, I have powers to imagine and to create and all the potentialities. I want to go back to nomadism as a philosophy of life and to say that Deleuze was interested in dismantling all the diagrams of what he called a society of control, and to imagine moving freely through the plains or through smooth space. Deleuze and Guattari had the idea that nomadism was for them inspired or maybe even illustrated by the historic figure of Genghis Khan, leader of the Mongol Empire that emerged in the 13th century. The Mongol warriors function as a symbol of the nomad for them, who moves through smooth space, while those who inhabit sedentary spaces or striated spaces are confined by the diagrams of all types and are conceptually related to modernity. So when Genghis Khan conquered a place, its inhabitants recognized him as their leader, while his desire was to return to the plains. He was not interested in being a subject diagrammed by sedentary life. So as I became interested in movement, perpetual transformation, nomadism, and the future, I began to apply these concepts not only to space, but also to time, and to wonder, what does it mean to be a nomad across time? And what does it mean to be a nomad if you apply it to identity? To imagine identities as always being reimagined, always in the flow, malleable, always in the making, and to ask other questions like, how does one imagine being other? How to stretch our concept of life beyond the Anthropocene? How does a nomad look at the world? How does a nomad read? I wanted to show you these images of a virtual version of Tzolkin, which I installed over the Rio Grande, thanks to the help and the support of Nancy Baker Cahill, another artist, colleague, and friend who gave me space in her platform to be able to place this work there. And thanks to the support also of Mexican friends, especially at the Nuevo Laredo Museum of Art, where who were willing, without knowing me at all, to go to the river and help me place this sculpture as an homage to Claudia Gomez Gonzalez, a Maya woman who was shot by a border patrol agent while she was unarmed after she had just crossed the river in this same area. And so this piece remained there as a monument to her, as a memory to her in the virtual world, but anyone who has a smartphone could see the piece over the Rio Grande if they went to visit this location. How to inhabit a life in a world that is subterranean, how to collapse chronologies, all those questions that I have been mentioning to you are my tasks. And I would like to speak of a few of my projects that follow these threads. One of the ways in which I'm exploring this is through the construction of a sculpture that I made during the pandemic, Glacial Erratic, with an entire team of people who supported me. The proposal of this sculpture received the Freeze Life Waters Sculpture Prize. And because of that, the sculpture was shown in New York at Rockefeller Center last September. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about how it was inspired. This is an image of one of the glacial erratic rocks that are all over Central Park in New York City, and that have been assimilated as part of the daily landscape, but that are rocks that were moved here by the melting glaciers millions of years ago, and that speak of the motion of the earth being in flow, of the landscape being in constant transformation, and where, well, we are not able to maybe see that because the landscape is in constant transformation at a speed that's so slow that one single lifetime might not make it visible. The landscape is in transformation, and if we are able to hold some sort of untimely community, transgenerational memory, we would be able to see that. We would be able to at least imagine that. So during the last ice age, the melting ice opened grooves on the Manhattan bedrock and also deposited numerous glacial erratics all over the landscape, like the ones that you see here. These large masses of rock differ in mineral content, in look, and in size, and in shape from the native rocks in the local landscape. Visible all over the city, in Central Park, in Prospect Park, in Battle Hill, in the Bronx, among many other sites all over the city, the matter that forms these rocks documents their migration before the human era, as well as the moment in which they emerged from the ice cap cover, as they were exposed to the light and to cosmic rays. The erratics were also touched by radiation, generating a process that documents their migration and the passing of time. The sculpture, made of steel, evokes an erratic as it invites the viewer to consider the long counts of time that are marked by the motions of the planet, the planetary nature of ancient migration, as well as the ways in which matter is marked by its placement and its interaction with the world around it. So let me show you some images of this sculpture so that you can see how it was made. Originally was made by torching sections of flat bar based on drawings that I made in chalk that were inspired by sections of a rock that I brought from, that I had brought from Nayarit in what is considered the origins of the world, Aztlán, and then transformed it into this large scale sculpture that has a lot of what could be read as craft, as handmade objects, as I don't know, hand-forged materials, as organic forms of shaping steel. But it's also a conversation with my prior works about the effort to return steel, which has been extracted from the earth, into stone, and to return it to its organic nature and to the earth. So here, Glacial Erratic, in conversation with the space at Rockefeller Center during free sculpture, is transforming its look as it's interacting with the atmosphere, as it begins to rain in New York City, etc. It begins to react, the steel begins to react to the atmosphere. And so this glyph that represents a mountain is the symbol and the title of an exhibition that I was invited to have, and I am so honored to have in collaboration with 5 other artists, Candice Lin, Rafa Esparza, Kang Song Lee, Pavitra Prasad, and Christian Tedeschi at the Lux Art Institute. And so we're currently installing this exhibition, and at the Lux Art Institute, the whole exhibition, we're installing it outside, and we have now taken on the function of being the melting glacier, and to bring this massive large-scale sculpture from Rockefeller Center to Southern California. So here in the images, you see the installation in process of Glacial Erratic in the mountain by the Lux Art Institute in Encinitas. The title of the exhibition is a glyph which represents the mountain. It evokes a snake of massive proportions that moves under the surface of the earth in the sacred subterranean world at a speed that is barely perceived by humans, and that transforms and shapes the land. As it moves, the snake exposes curved sections of its monumental body, forming the mountains in the horizon. The ancient glyph that captures this concept was carved in stone and drawn in multiple codices to evoke the Aztec voice of Tepetl, the Maya as width. In English, we might say mountain, and we might say cerro in Spanish, but it would be devoid of the spiritual meaning that conveys the abstraction of time and the idea that the earth as a hyperobject is in motion, but in the human temporality is not. The glyph was read in different languages across what is now Mesoamerica and Central Mexico. The oldest term of this glyph was an Olmec word. Unfortunately, we don't know its voice. Today, its memory survives only in ancient stone carvings that the Olmec artists made thousands of years ago, and in multiple surviving codices of the Teotihuacan peoples, and those made by the Toltec, Mixtec, Aztec, and Maya artists. As the mountains flow in a rhythm that is visible only in the long counts of time, people who carry the sacred memory migrate in different directions at different speeds and cross the landscape, come together with others and create, like other artists did before them, in the brevity of one human lifetime or the fleeting moments set by the short counts of time. In this landscape and at each moment, the different temporalities and the different paths come together. This image, I wanted to show it because it's an image that was taken about 10 minutes before I began the talk at the Lux Art Institute, and say hello to everyone there, to the curators, Andrew and Gosha, and to Tatiana, who's my assistant in the studio, who are working in finishing the installation of this piece today. And finally, I would like to end this talk by sharing with you some comments about another exhibition with a collaboration with another LA-based artist, my friend Kang Song Lee. And the title of our exhibition is Becoming Atmosphere. These works are on view at the 18th Street Art Center, and they're also visible through a virtual tour. And I wanted to begin here because this piece called Glacial Pothole is definitely a conversation and a complement to Glacial Erratic, and it's a piece that I plan to bring later on in February during my days in residence at the Lux Art Institute to the Institute and install it there. And so the works in this exhibition explore erasure, entanglement, porousness, intergenerational care, and the concept of untimely communities. In Pure Immanence, the laws had argued that a life, before it was defined as someone's life, contained all the possibilities of the plane of immanence, or in Spinozian terms, all the potentialities. The laws agrees with this distinction and further imagines the potential that is defined by a life before subjectivity. And he states in Pure Immanence, a life of pure immanence is neutral, beyond good and evil, for it was only the subject that incarnated it in the midst of things that made it good or bad. The life of such individuality fades away in favor of the singular life immanent to a man who no longer has a name, though he can be mistaken for no other, a singular essence, a life. And so these are some views of Becoming Atmosphere. You can see space capsule inspired by Sputnik 1 that is suspended up in the air above the space, and the infinite mixture of all things past, present, and future is this sculpture that you see on the right with the stems. Some of the roots drawings by Kang, a work called Archiving Dirt that is a small cutting of a cactus that belonged to Harvey Milk. When he was murdered, his roommates and friends gave cuttings of this cactus to different members of the community who gave them to other people, and in this way generated a system of collective care for the survival of a cactus that symbolically represents so much more of that moment. In other words, the construction of a fixed, permanent, and even transcendental identity, that is, one that continues to exist beyond the limits imposed by a life, takes away the possibility to imagine a future outside the limits of identity. It takes away the possibility to imagine our future becoming beyond the limits imposed by our body and our identity. Rosi Braidotti builds on these ideas as she moves beyond the singularity of a life to the dismantling of a single subject, because the idea of singular subjectivity is linked to Western reason and to Western understandings of humanism. In order to think of a collective subjectivity, then Braidotti does not imagine an organized, conformed subject following Hegelian tradition of Western thought, but rather a spontaneous formation of self-organizing collectivity. This was one of the most important contributions of Spinoza's last and unfinished text. And as Antonio Negri has shown, Spinoza's political treatise argues for a concept of democracy that has no contractual structure. In other words, is spontaneous. It's a spontaneous collective formation. And in this exhibition, what you see is something of that, many voices coming together through different works, entering into conversation with each other, having conversations about a life that continues beyond human life under the earth, and thinking about other forms of existence, preserving gifts of generosity that others left for us at other moments in time, and that we preserve and hold for others in the future, and the idea that we are preserving gifts of generosity for unknown others that we will never meet. And so in this sense, this exhibition allows us to reproduce so many of the voices of so many people. In Becoming Atmosphere, Kang and I consider the atmosphere as the subject of untimely powers and quantum vibrancy that allows for the formation of untimely communities, because basically we're breathing each other. In the ultimate mixture of all things past, present, and future, the idea is that we're breathing each other, that we're breathing what people in the past were breathing, and that we're breathing what people in the future will breathe. And if that sounded so incredible to us before the pandemic, we now know that we are breathing each other for a fact after the pandemic. And so I wanted to show you some of these works. For instance, these two works, the pink one is called Becoming Atmosphere, and the clear one is called The Future Perfect, are works that hold collective voices. In the one hand, the pink one holds drawings that Kang made of drawings that another artist had made before him, etc. And in The Future Perfect, we hold the voices of different artists and different members of our community that sent us these desires for the future, imagining a future perfect. And some of these works we sent by mail through queer correspondence from the mailing list at the 18th Street Art Center as an open call where people could sign up and receive some of the tickets from these machines. And so some of them have different languages. All of them have these three languages: Korean, English, and Spanish, the languages that the two of us speak. And then some of them come with one message, some of them come with another, and you get one by chance. It's an aleatory thing, like the ones in Patricia. And this one says, when the future comes, we will have felt safe enough to love the present. When the future comes, we will have walked through walls. When the future comes, we will have transformed our bodies, etc. And so in this process of producing this work, reproducing the works of others in so many ways, through Harvey, not only the voice of Harvey, the entire community that has preserved his cactus, but the voice of Julie Tolentino, who preserved this particular cutling, which she received from a librarian at UCLA, and that she shared with Kang, for Kang and I to have in this exhibition and share with everybody else, is this effort of multiple forms of sharing and bringing to others. During the pandemic, I also had the opportunity to work with communities of Central American organizations working for immigrant rights. And we made this mural, which was photographed here from a drone, in chalk. And it was a beautiful experience of also finding ways to bring messages collectively to others. In this case, a message that the collectivity of organizations had decided upon. It not only says defund ICE, but it has the Wipalas, which speak of the multicultural presence in Latin America and of indigenous survival in Latin America. And it was made by people in different organizations, including SALEF, the Salvadoran American Leadership and Educational Fund, Clínica Romero, El Rescate, Maya Visión, Carecen, Endilon, the National Day Laborer Network, CARPI, or the Central American Research and Policy Institute, and all of us together, seeing everybody there, being able to organize this event, making this happen, bringing the community organizations that don't always have the opportunity to work together, to play like children with me on the street and to feel this message that was politically so important for all of us, was really powerful to do on July 3rd in the middle of the pandemic. And it also was prelude to the sky typers that came a little bit later in the day, that same day, as part of In Plain Sight collaboration between 80 artists that also included this collective of community organizations as one of the artists. Together, they also wrote in the sky, Makaka Keish Takib, meaning we will not be afraid. In Maya Quiche, they wrote by over the border as a message that was sent to an unknown immigrant who would be crossing the border at that moment and who would see in the sky their own language, Maya Quiche, written in the sky saying we will not be afraid. My piece was written over downtown Los Angeles, and it was a bilingual piece in English and Spanish, no cages, no jaulas, that spoke about the need for us to get rid of the detention centers for profit and of the cages where the children are separated from their families in such a painful, traumatic punishment that will, without a doubt, have an impact for years to come in our communities. And so these are some of the messages that these artists wrote in the atmosphere. And so I wanted to show you that and to end by saying that in Becoming Atmosphere, Kang and I consider the atmosphere as this object of untimely powers and quantum vibrancy, and an object that allows for the formation of untimely communities in cosmic collective becoming. And we were inspired by the writings of Emanuele Coccia that spoke about how plants are the ones that are forming these atmospheres and recirculating the particles of those in the past and those in the future. And so in Becoming Atmosphere, we question the erasure of others who came before us and who remain unseen, invisible. The atmosphere becomes then a communal space that holds intergenerational memories and makes coexistence in multiple temporalities possible. In the sculpture titled after Coccia's line, The Infinite Mixture of All Things Past, Present, and Future, I combined these ideas about simultaneity, about the motion of gears, about circular and linear motions, and also about the creation of atmospheres, the creation of worlds through plants, and the evidence of migrations, etc. But next to it, there's this piece with quotes of some of the few testimonies that have been able to be taken out of the detention centers, the words of children recirculated in this space, Becoming Atmosphere, and recirculated for all of us to hear. Mi bebé está enfermo, my baby is sick. I am always hungry here. Ya no he vuelto a ver a mi papá. I have not been able to see my father again. I sleep on the floor. I have a metallic blanket. Thank you so much. I will stop there so that we can have a conversation.
Thank you so much, Beatriz, for that amazing lecture. That was great.
Thank you, Bailey.
Thanks for coming. It's really an honor to have you.
My pleasure.
We do have some questions. Oh, yeah. Thank you. We have some questions in the chat. Let me see. Reinhardt asks, how do you think of time in relationship to the sculptural object? Is it important that they endure / are cared for or allowed to decay through natural processes?
Well, it depends on the object, and I think it's important to care for the objects, even the sculptures that are unsealed and that are reacting to the atmosphere. For me, it's important that they react to the atmosphere, or that they become a sort of archive that document their time in a space. But for me, it's not important that these objects are marked by the installation of them, for example. So when we're installing, we're always very careful to install using gloves and not marking it and protecting it. The same with displaying it and the same with preserving it. But at the same time, my use of steel for me brings or makes visible or questions even the idea that steel is unmovable, permanent, because we have the idea that if our buildings in Los Angeles are made of steel, they're going to last forever, right? And we have this idea that steel is permanent, but steel is organic. And so in my effort to make visible the organic nature of steel, I'm trying to make visible the fact that modernities crumble. They might crumble at different paces, but they crumble. And we might think that modernity is moving towards some idea of progress or an improved version of modernity. But the fact is that the moment that modernity is also capitalism. The moment that I take out my iPhone from the store, it has already decayed and it has already crumbled in its value within capitalism and in its use. And so what I'm trying to do with this not sealing the steel is allowing it to be organic, but of course I care for it very much.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that insight into your sort of material process. That's great. Let me ask another question. Isidro asks, I see that you work a lot with concepts of indigeneity from Mesoamerica. How do you think of your work in relationship to indigeneity in relationship to these lands?
To these lands here?
I'm not sure if he means Mesoamerica or like Southern California, but I guess either.
Maybe that question came a little earlier, but I think throughout the talk, I have been speaking a little bit about how my work enters into conversation with ideas that are ancient ideas of indigenous peoples and in collaboration with contemporary indigenous thinkers, so that I make every effort to make sure that indigenous peoples are not speaking in their absence, they're not absent from my conversations of the past and of the present. And so for me, it has been really important, for instance, the efforts that I have made to collaborate, but also they have made to collaborate. And in our effort to stretch the idea that you can form community with ancestors across time, we have also made every effort to form community across space and to understand that our peoples of many different kinds are migrating and trying to be each other's hands, trying to be each other's extension. And so in many ways, we have been collaborating in different projects. For instance, with the members of the Cajay Collective, we have been working for the last few months in the making of a collaborative piece that includes the equipo from Fiebre, the two artists that are part of the Fiebre Ediciones in Mexico City, and who made the book with us, and myself. And we are making work for a show that's going to open at Lace. It was supposed to open in January, but it's going to now open in May, called Intergalactics. And so for me, being in, for example, in the mountain at the Lux Art Institute, I am seeking to recognize that this mountain is a mountain that is ancient, that was here even before indigenous peoples came to inhabit it, but that they were the first inhabitants of this space, and trying to also make visible the idea that that we are in motion and bringing the ideas of ancient peoples from Central America to this mountain. Kang, for example, who's one of the artists who's participating, is making ceramics with clay from California, but with earth from other mountains in Seoul and in other places, and bringing them to this mountain. So our interaction is not only with other humans, but also our effort to collaborate with the mountain in moving across time and space.
Thank you. Let's see, Matt has a question. He says, thank you for the discussion. Could you explain the context of the story you mentioned of the objects rebelling against the people, plates breaking and caves closing?
That's a scene from the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Maya Quiche. That is it's a very important scene because it's the story about how the objects rebelled because they were not being treated well by humans. And so when the objects rebelled, they decided not to cooperate with humans. And so it's also this very idea very much in tune with contemporary speculative philosophies about non-human life and about matter being intelligent and self-organizing, etc. And so I'm really interested in that. This semester, for example, I'm teaching a seminar at Cal State Northridge that's about imaginaries of the future, where I am taking different ideas from different philosophical perspectives, like, for example, a hyperobject, and looking at its corresponding idea in stone, so that we can see these two versions of thinkers entering into conversation in an untimely way.
That's so interesting. We have kind of a related question. Your work seems to be in dialogue with a sort of future past. Can you speak more to the idea you mentioned during your lecture of collapsed time?
Yes, I'm making an effort to collapse chronologies because I'm not convinced that time is moving in a linear way. So inspired by ancient versions of calendars that are circular and that are multiple, that have simultaneities and different understandings of the long count of time, the short count of time, the agricultural calendar, etc. I'm trying to imagine other possibilities for time that is not a linear Darwinian understanding of time.
That's awesome. I love to hear that.
It's very fun to try to do that with everything.
Let's see. Nicole asks, she says, this is amazing. Can't wait to see you again in person. Can you speak a bit to this idea of embracing an idea of shifting identities and how you identify yourself?
Yeah, I think that's really important because for me, I think that it's really important to fight for the visibility of people of color, of Central American immigrants, and I do. But at the same time, it's really important to fight for a right to not have others define what that means, and to constantly be reinventing and imagining malleable ways of understanding that, and thinking about how that allows us to imagine and invent our future. And so, for example, oftentimes this happens to me a lot when people, some people, not everyone, of course, but sometimes people say, where are you from? Are you an immigrant from El Salvador? Okay, so your work means this. And, you know, my answer always is, maybe you should spend time with the work because I have never made a work about me, which is absolutely a lie, but it's also the truth, because my work is not about my identity, and my identity is in constant transformation. I'm moving at light speed. And so I'm not interested in anyone defining it and or defining my intentions in making this work or my past. And that, you know, has to do with the idea that at some point in time, I was maybe still at CalArts, and I was already a scholar, and I was writing about ideas about nomadism, etc. But I couldn't stop making work about growing up in the war in El Salvador, or about migration, because it was so traumatic for me to migrate by myself. And it was so traumatic to live in the war and later on to understand what that meant. So I realized that I was a contradiction, that I was making work that would never agree with what I thought as a thinker. And I began to think, how do I get out of this? How do I get out of this problem that I'm not able to solve so easily? And I am having a similar problem these days. I think it's really interesting, for example, the critique that Catherine Youssef has of the Anthropocene 1 billion Black Anthropocenes or none, where she says, well, the Black Anthropocene began when people were enslaved. It didn't begin now, and now white people are being worried about the Anthropocene because now there's global warming and they're being impacted. But indigenous peoples were colonized 500 years ago, but Black people were enslaved. So at the end of our Anthropocene began earlier. And I'm having a lot of trouble digesting that because I think it's dragging the idea of the Anthropocene to identity. So I think that, I mean, your question, Nicole, is really important. I don't have a very good answer because identity is important to me. And I understand what Catherine Youssef is saying, for example, about the end of the Anthropocene, but I also think that we have to give ourselves permission to think of the end of the Anthropocene, not as something actual that's happening, but as something imaginary that will allow us to imagine the earth without humans, so that we can destroy the humanism that's the foundation of Western reason, and we can get rid of that and create another world with another logic that is not that, the Enlightenment, the Illustration, modernity, etc. And in order to do that, the Anthropocenes cannot be going back to humanism or to identities. I think we have to move beyond that, but solving that riddle has not been easy for me. And as I have been thinking about that in the last few days, some days I don't sleep because I think I don't know if Catherine Youssef is right, or I don't know. I mean, I don't know if the people who are thinking about the end of the Anthropocene are, what do I think about that? You know, it's a very difficult question. And I think what I find as an answer is the right to have my identity in constant motion, like your lights.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that response with us. That was great. Let's see. Alana asks, they say, nice to hear from you. And then going back to the discussion of time, could you say a bit more about the future perfect? How does this tie in with futurisms and utopias?
Hi, Elena. Well, the future perfect is this very interesting time frame, which is a past tense in the future. In other words, a moment in the future where the future that has not happened yet is already a past. So, for example, if I say when the future comes, we will have met our relatives in person. That statement is a statement that says that I have not met all my relatives in person, or we have not met all our relatives in person. But that when that certain future comes, by then, the moment when we meet our relatives in person will already be in the past, even though that moment is in the future also for me. And so it's creating different temporalities already and creating a future past from today. That's, in my opinion, interesting. But also, this idea is inspired by Rosi Braidotti's writing in Nomadic Theory, where she talks about how the future perfect, especially if you use it in a plural form. So not saying I will have, but we will have done this, is a way to open up the possibility to imagine collective nomadic subjectivities that are not about individual, singular subjectivities.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's see. Changing directions a little bit. This next question is about site specificity. Much of your work seems to address site-specific issues. What is your process for embarking on site-specific research?
I think that's really interesting. Sometimes I make my work based on the ideas that I'm thinking about, and also the works of ancient stone carvers, etc. But sometimes I go to a place and I try to make work about that place, and in that, and also I think that sometimes I work from archives, and that's also important to me. And so the idea of working from one place and being able to think about what archives might inform this place, what stories are contained here, what palimpsests are here, what different layers and layers of versions of this place are there, allows me to think about how to make a work that reveals those different temporalities. And how can I imagine this place in the future? And so sometimes the work is about that effort to reveal those temporalities.
That's so interesting. Let's see, a couple more questions. It seems like collaboration is a major element of your practice. And I think you already touched on this a little bit, but can you speak more about the role of collaboration in your work?
Yeah, I think that not only is collaboration, but also the idea of having these multiple voices. Sometimes they come from other temporalities, from those imaginary friends that I was mentioning. Sometimes they come from an archive. Sometimes they come from the people who work with me in the studio and who are embedding their labor onto the piece. And sometimes they come from collaborating with other artists, with other thinkers, with other people in other disciplines. In many ways, my work has been also impacted by my being at the Department of Central American Studies at CSUN, where I'm in constant conversations with my students who are experiencing all these migratory policies and who are a part of migrating families, divided families, etc. And also my collaboration with my colleagues, especially with my colleagues who are thinking in similar ways about nomadism, etc. So I think there's all that in there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for answering all our questions, and thank you for this amazing lecture and conversation. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and be with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to Paolo for doing the technical stuff as always. And thanks to Amy and Anya.
Paolo, really, thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I just want to say thanks to all for coming to the 2021 Longenecker-Roth Artist in Residence Lecture. And we look forward to seeing you all next February 12th for a talk by Nicole Fleetwood, author of Marking Time, Art in the Age of Mass Incarceration. Please visit the UCSD Visual Arts website for details. Thank you all for coming and have a great weekend. And thanks again, Beatriz.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.